Mom, we've decided to have Christmas without you this year. It's better for everyone. My daughter Sophia's words cut deeper than any knife ever could. What she didn't know as she banned me from Christmas was that I had just signed the papers. Ravenswood Estate, the breathtaking manor where she'd held her fairy tale wedding just 8 months ago, was now entirely mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Catherine Whitmore, and for 28 years, I thought I understood what it meant to be a devoted mother. I raised my daughter Sophia as a single parent after her father walked out when she was just 5 years old, claiming he needed space to find himself. What he really needed was freedom from the responsibility of raising a family, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our shattered life. Those early years were brutal. I worked double shifts as a physical therapist at Riverside Medical Center, often pulling 16-hour days just to keep our modest apartment in Millbrook Heights. While other mothers attended PTA meetings, I was rushing between my day job and my evening shifts at the rehabilitation clinic. While they had family vacations, Sophia and I made do with picnics in the local park and movie nights on our secondhand couch. But there was one thing I refused to compromise on: Christmas. No matter how tight money was, no matter how exhausted, I felt Christmas at the Whitmore house was magical. I saved all year for that one perfect month, shopping clearance sales in January for the following December, hand-making ornaments during my lunch breaks, and spending hours creating the kind of Christmas morning that would make Sophia's eyes light up like stars. I still remember the year she was 8, when I worked overtime for 3 months straight to buy her that pink bicycle she'd been dreaming about. I assembled it Christmas Eve after she went to bed, my hands shaking from exhaustion, but my heart full of joy knowing how happy she'd be. When she saw it on Christmas morning, she threw her arms around me and said, "Mommy, you're the best person in the whole world." Those words sustained me through everything: the sleepless nights, the financial stress, the loneliness of being the only parent making all the decisions. Christmas became our anchor, our proof that despite everything we'd lost, we still had each other. As Sophia grew older, our traditions evolved but never disappeared. In high school, she'd help me bake dozens of cinnamon rolls for our Christmas morning breakfast, flour dusting her dark hair as she laughed at my attempts to create perfect spirals. In college, she'd bring friends home who had nowhere else to go, and our small apartment would burst with voices and laughter. "Your mom's the coolest," her roommate Jessica told her one year. "She makes Christmas feel like a warm hug." When Sophia met Marcus during her senior year at Northwestern University, I welcomed him with open arms. He seemed kind, ambitious, and clearly adored my daughter. Marcus came from a wealthy family. His father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. But he was never condescending about our simple traditions. At least, not at first. Their wedding 8 months ago was everything Sophia had dreamed of. They chose Ravenswood Estate, a stunning 19th century manor nestled in the hills outside the city. The venue was breathtaking: rolling gardens, crystal chandeliers, and a ballroom that looked like something from a fairy tale. I spent nearly my entire savings to help make her dream day perfect, but seeing her happiness made every sacrifice worthwhile. Marcus's family handled most of the planning naturally. His mother, Vivienne, was a force of nature, perfectly dressed, impeccably connected, and subtly dismissive of anyone she deemed beneath her social circle. She made it clear from our first meeting that she found my profession quaint and my modest lifestyle charming in its simplicity. But Sophia was happy. Marcus seemed to love her genuinely, and I thought we could all find a way to be family together. After the wedding, they moved into a beautiful colonial house in Thornfield Meadows, one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the area. Marcus's wedding gift to Sophia was the down payment, a casual gesture that represented more money than I'd ever seen at one time. I was so proud of the life she was building, the security she'd found that I'd never been able to provide. When Little Oliver was born 18 months ago. I thought my heart might burst with love. I became the doting grandmother, babysitting whenever they needed, bringing homemade baby food and hand-knitted sweaters. Sophia seemed grateful for my help, especially during those exhausting first months of motherhood. But something changed after they settled into their new life. Marcus started making subtle comments about outdated family dynamics and the importance of establishing independence. Sophia began declining my invitations more frequently, claiming they were too busy, or that Oliver needed to maintain his routine. Still, I never imagined Christmas would be the casualty. Christmas, our sacred tradition, the foundation of everything we'd built together through all those years of struggle and sacrifice. 3 weeks ago, Sophia called me from her beautiful home in Thornfield Meadows. I was in my kitchen, surrounded by the Christmas decorations I'd already started putting up, the same ornaments we'd collected together over the years, each one a memory, a shared moment of joy. "Mom," she said, her voice strangely formal, as if she were speaking to a business associate rather than the woman who'd raised her. "Marcus and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if we started our own Christmas traditions this year. You know, just our little family." I stood there, holding my phone with trembling hands, staring at the half-decorated tree that suddenly seemed pathetic and small. 28 years of Christmas mornings, of traditions built from love and sacrifice, dismissed in a single phone call. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I managed to ask, though I already knew exactly what she meant. "I mean, we won't be coming over for Christmas this year, and we'd prefer to have Christmas Day just to ourselves. Oliver's getting older, and we want to create our own family memories now." Our own family memories. As if everything we'd shared meant nothing. As if I wasn't family anymore. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of Christmas, decorations that suddenly felt like monuments to a life that was slipping away from me. For the first time in 28 years, I had nowhere to go for Christmas. To understand how devastating this moment was, you need to know what Christmas really meant to us, and why Sophia's rejection cut so deep it felt like losing a part of my soul. When Sophia's father, David, left us, he didn't just abandon a marriage. He shattered a 5-year-old's belief that families stay together. I'll never forget the night I found Sophia sitting by her bedroom window, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and asking if Daddy left because she wasn't good enough. That's the moment I made a promise to myself. I would be enough for both of us, and she would never doubt her worth again. But being a single mother in 1995 wasn't like it is today. There were no support groups, no online communities, no flexible work arrangements. I was on my own with a kindergartner and a pile of bills that seemed to grow every month. David's child support checks arrived sporadically when they arrived, at all, usually accompanied by some excuse about his transitional period as he figured out his new life in California with his 23-year-old girlfriend. I remember those first few months after he left, lying awake at night doing math. In my head, rent, groceries, daycare, utilities, the numbers never added up. There were weeks when I survived on peanut butter sandwiches so Sophia could have proper meals. There were months when I wore the same 3 work outfits because buying clothes for myself meant choosing between that and buying Sophia new shoes. My job at Riverside Medical Center was demanding but stable. Physical therapy requires you to be on for every patient, encouraging, positive, hopeful. Some days, pretending. To be strong for my patients was practice for being strong for Sophia. I'd spend my shifts helping people recover from injuries and setbacks, then come home and help my daughter recover from the biggest setback of her young life. The other therapists were kind, but most of them had husbands to share the load with. They'd chat about date nights and weekend getaways while I calculated whether I could afford to take Sophia to see the latest Disney movie. They meant well when they suggested I should get back out there and start dating again. But they didn't understand that I barely had enough emotional energy for Sophia, let alone some stranger who might disappoint us both. That's when I discovered the magic of Christmas. Not the commercial version with expensive gifts and elaborate vacations, but something deeper. The power of creating wonder through intention and love rather than money. Our first Christmas alone was also our most important. I had exactly $47 left after paying December's bills. $47 to create the kind of Christmas that would prove to my daughter that our little family of two was complete and beautiful and enough. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I spent hours at the craft store, carefully selecting materials for homemade ornaments. Felt and glue and ribbons that cost pennies, but could become anything with enough creativity and love. Sophia and I spent every evening that December making decorations, each one unique and special. We made paper snowflakes from old magazines, strung popcorn until our fingers were sore, and painted pine cones we'd collected from the park down the street. For her main gift, I found a dollhouse at a garage sale, wooden, sturdy, but completely bare. I spent 3 weeks after Sophia went to bed each night, painting tiny rooms, sewing miniature curtains from fabric scraps, and creating furniture from cardboard and imagination. Christmas morning, when she saw that dollhouse with its perfect little rooms and tiny handmade details, she gasped with pure joy. "Mommy, did Santa make this specially for me?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "He had help," I told her, "from someone who loves you very much." That Christmas taught me something profound. The most meaningful gifts aren't the most expensive ones. They're the ones that carry love in every detail. The ones that say, "I see you, I know you, and you are worth every moment I spent creating this for you." From then on, Christmas became our masterpiece. Every year we'd start planning in September. Sophia would make lists, not just of gifts she wanted, but of activities we'd do together. Baking cookies for the neighbors, watching holiday movies while drinking hot chocolate, driving around town to look at Christmas lights in the fancy neighborhoods where we couldn't afford to live, but could still admire the beauty. When money was especially tight, like the year I needed emergency dental work, we got creative. We made gifts for each other. She'd write me stories and illustrate them. I'd knit her scarves and hats in her favorite colors. Those were often our most treasured Christmas mornings because every gift carried such personal meaning. As Sophia grew older, she never lost her appreciation for our traditions. In middle school, when her friends were asking for expensive electronics, she still got excited about our annual gingerbread house competition. In high school, when she could have been embarrassed by our modest celebrations, she brought friends home who marveled at the warmth and creativity of our Christmas magic. "Mrs. Whitmore," her friend Emma told me one year, "your house feels like Christmas itself. Like, if Christmas was a person, it would feel like being here." College didn't dim her enthusiasm either. Sophia would come home from Northwestern, full of stories about her sophisticated new friends and their families' elaborate holiday parties. But she always said our Christmas felt the most like home. She'd help me with the traditional baking marathon, laugh at my increasingly creative wrapping paper alternatives, and curl up on the couch Christmas morning just like she had as a little girl. Even after she met Marcus, even after she started spending time with his family and their formal holiday gatherings at country clubs and expensive restaurants, she never suggested changing our traditions. If anything, she seemed to treasure them more, often telling Marcus stories about our creative decorating sessions or the year we made ornaments out of old family photos. "Your mom's amazing," Marcus told her once. And I hoped, that meant he understood what we'd built together. When their engagement was announced, Sophia asked me to help her plan a Christmas-themed engagement party. We spent weeks creating centerpieces from pine cones and evergreen boughs, stringing lights throughout her apartment, and baking hundreds of her favorite sugar cookies cut into snowflake shapes. Seeing her incorporate our traditions into this new chapter of her life felt like the ultimate validation of everything we'd built together. The engagement party was perfect. Marcus's family attended, elegant and polite, though I noticed Vivian photographing our homemade decorations with what seemed like amused fascination rather than genuine appreciation. But Marcus himself seemed charmed by the warmth of our celebration, and Sophia glowed with happiness. That night, as we cleaned up together, Sophia hugged me tight and said, "Mom, promise me that no matter how big our family gets, we'll never lose this. We'll never lose Christmas." "Never," I promised her, believing with every fiber of my being that some bonds are unbreakable. But families change. People change. And sometimes the traditions that once felt sacred become inconvenient. Reminders of a simpler time that no longer fits the complex sophistication of adult life. The warning signs were subtle at first. Last Christmas, just 10 months after their wedding, Sophia seemed distracted during our usual activities. She checked her phone constantly, worried about Oliver's nap schedule, and left earlier than usual to attend a Christmas Eve dinner at Marcus's family's country club. Still, she came. Still, she participated. Still, she seemed to value what we'd built together, or so I thought. Sitting in my apartment that night after her phone call, surrounded by all those carefully saved decorations and a lifetime of Christmas memories, I realized that I'd been holding on to something that maybe only existed in my own heart anymore. Maybe Sophia had outgrown us. Maybe our traditions were just relics of a harder time she no longer wanted to remember. For the first time since David left, I felt truly alone. The next few days passed in a haze of disbelief and mounting hurt. I kept replaying Sophia's words, searching for some nuance I might have missed, some sign that this wasn't the final rejection it seemed to be. But every time I remembered that formal, distant tone in her voice, the careful way she'd said, "our little family," as if I wasn't part of it anymore, the reality hit me fresh. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Marcus had convinced her that establishing independence was important for young families. Maybe his mother, Vivienne, had made some subtle comment about mother-in-laws who were too involved. Maybe Sophia genuinely believed this was best for Oliver, creating new traditions that belonged entirely to his immediate family. But deep down, I knew this wasn't really about establishing independence or creating new traditions. This was about embarrassment. Somewhere along the way, our beautiful, heartfelt Christmas celebrations had become something Sophia wanted to distance herself from. The first real sign of trouble had actually come 6 months earlier, shortly after Oliver's first birthday party. I'd offered to host his second birthday at my apartment, suggesting we could decorate with homemade banners and bake his cake together like we always had for Sophia's birthdays. The look that crossed her face was brief but unmistakable, a flash of something that looked almost like horror. "Oh, Mom, that's so sweet," she'd said carefully. "But Marcus and I were thinking of having it at the country club. You know, somewhere with more space, more appropriate facilities." Appropriate facilities. As if my modest apartment, where she'd celebrated every milestone of her life until she met Marcus, was suddenly inadequate for her son. I should have recognized that moment for what it was, the beginning of the end of our shared traditions. But I'd chosen to believe it was just about space, about wanting Oliver's party to be special. I'd even offered to help pay for the country club venue, though the cost would have meant eating rice and beans for 2 months. "That's not necessary, Mom," Sophia had said quickly. "Marcus's family is covering everything." Marcus's family. Always Marcus's family now, as if my 28 years of being her family had been erased the moment she exchanged vows. The birthday party itself had been elegant and perfectly orchestrated. Vivian had hired professional decorators, a photographer, and even a clown who charged more for 2 hours than I made in a week. Oliver had been overwhelmed by all the strangers and formal attention, crying through most of the celebration, while Sophia smiled tensely and assured everyone he was just tired. I'd watched from the sidelines, wearing my best dress, the one I'd bought for her wedding, feeling like a guest at my own grandson's birthday party. The other attendees were Marcus's family friends, couples from their neighborhood, and Sophia's college friends who now worked at prestigious firms and lived in houses with circular driveways. When it came time to open gifts, Oliver had gravitated toward the simplest present. A handmade teddy bear I'd sewn from fabric scraps, with button eyes and a crooked smile. While he'd ignored the expensive toys and electronics, he'd clutched that little bear and babbled happily at its friendly face. "How charming," Vivian had commented, watching Oliver snuggle the bear. "Handmade gifts have such a rustic appeal, don't they?" Rustic appeal. As if the love I'd stitched into every seam was quaint and outdated, something to be tolerated, rather than treasured. But it was Sophia's reaction that cut deepest. Instead of defending the gift, instead of sharing the story of how I'd made her dozens of similar toys throughout her childhood, she'd simply smiled tightly and quickly moved on to the next present. Later, when I'd asked if she wanted me to make matching outfits for Oliver and his bear, she'd declined, saying he had so many clothes already. That's when I began to understand that my gifts, my traditions, my very presence in their new life, had become an embarrassment to be managed rather than a blessing to be celebrated. The pattern continued throughout the summer and fall. Invitations to family gatherings became less frequent. When they did include me, I noticed how Sophia would gently steer conversations away from my work, my neighborhood, my life. If I mentioned needing to repair something in my apartment or saving up for a small purchase, she'd change the subject quickly, as if my financial limitations were somehow shameful. During our last family dinner together in October, Marcus had been discussing their upcoming renovations, adding a wine cellar and expanding the master suite. When I'd mentioned how impressed I was by their beautiful home, Sophia had jumped in quickly. "Well, we've been very fortunate," she'd said, emphasizing the word "we" in a way that clearly excluded me from their success story. But it was Vivian who delivered the most telling blow, though she probably didn't realize I was listening. I'd gone to use the bathroom during Oliver's baptism celebration when I overheard her talking to another guest in the hallway. "Sophia's done remarkably well for herself, considering her background," Vivian had said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they think they're being charitable. Of course, Marcus has been wonderful about integrating her into proper society. It's amazing what a good marriage can do to elevate someone's circumstances. As if Sophia had been rescued from some tragic fate, rather than loved and nurtured by a mother who'd given everything she had. The woman she'd been speaking to had murmured agreement, adding, "It must be challenging, though, managing the family dynamics. Different backgrounds can create such complications." "Oh, Catherine means well," Vivian had replied, using the tone people reserve for discussing simple-minded relatives. "She's very earnest." But Sophia and Marcus are building something sophisticated now. They can't be held back by outdated expectations. Like expecting to spend Christmas with my daughter and grandson. Like expecting that 28 years of devotion might earn me a permanent place in Sophia's life, rather than a provisional one that could be revoked whenever it became inconvenient. I'd returned to the party with my face burning, but I'd said nothing. What could I say? That I'd overheard myself being discussed like a problem to be solved? That my own daughter's mother-in-law saw me as a liability rather than an asset? Instead, I'd smiled and cooed over Oliver and complimented Sophia on her beautiful home and pretended I hadn't heard the conversation that confirmed my worst fears. I was being managed, tolerated, gradually phased out of a life I'd spent decades building. The final confirmation came 2 weeks before Sophia's Christmas call, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. I'd been babysitting Oliver while they attended a charity gala, one of the few times Sophia still asked for my help, probably because professional childcare for evening events was expensive even for them. Oliver had been fussy, and in desperation, I'd started singing the lullabies I used to sing to Sophia, old songs my own mother had sung to me, Simple melodies with nonsensical words that somehow always worked magic on crying babies. When Sophia and Marcus returned, they found Oliver fast asleep in my arms while I hummed softly. Instead of being grateful or charmed, Sophia had looked almost panicked. "Mom, what song was that?" she'd asked, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. "Just an old lullaby, sweetheart. The same ones I sang to you when you were little." Marcus had exchanged a glance with Sophia, one of those wordless communications that married couples share. Later, as they drove me home, Sophia had mentioned that they were working with a pediatric sleep specialist to establish healthy sleep associations for Oliver. "We're trying to keep his bedtime routine very consistent," she'd explained. "The specialist says introducing random elements can be disruptive." Random elements. My lullabies, the same ones that had comforted her through countless nights, were now random elements to be eliminated from her son's life. That night, sitting in my apartment after they'd dropped me off with polite thanks and careful distance, I'd finally admitted to myself what I'd been trying to ignore for months. Sophia was ashamed of me. Not just of my modest circumstances or simple traditions, but of me. Of who I was, where I came from, what I represented in her new, elevated world. And now, with her Christmas ultimatum, she'd made it official. I was no longer welcome in the life I'd spent nearly 3 decades building. But what Sophia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their perfect new world, their elegant home, their sophisticated friends, their beautiful wedding venue, wasn't quite as unshakable as they believed. Some foundations, no matter how beautiful they appear on the surface, are built on less solid ground than they realize. The weeks following Sophia's Christmas ultimatum felt like watching a slow motion car accident that I was powerless to stop. What made it worse was how normal everything appeared on the surface. Sophia still called me once a week, though our conversations had become stilted and formal. She still sent photos of Oliver, though they felt more like updates to a distant relative than shares with a devoted grandmother. And she still asked about my work, though I could hear her checking out emotionally while I answered. The most painful part was how carefully orchestrated it all felt. Every interaction seemed designed to maintain the appearance of a loving relationship while systematically removing its substance. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to seem reasonable, but together forming a devastating pattern of exclusion. The first cut came just 3 days after the Christmas call. I'd planned to take Oliver to see the holiday lights, display at Brookfield Gardens, something that had become our little tradition over the past year. Every week since he'd turned 1, I'd taken him somewhere special. The zoo, the children's museum, the park by the lake. These grandmother-grandson adventures were some of my most treasured moments, watching him discover the world through eyes full of wonder. When I called to confirm our plans, Sophia's voice was strained. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry, but we can't do that this week. Oliver's been having some sleep issues, and Marcus and I think we need to keep his schedule really strict right now." "Of course, sweetheart. What about next week?" A pause. "Actually, we're thinking it might be better to pause the regular outings for a while, just until we get his routine more stable." The regular outings. Our precious tradition reduced to a clinical term that could be easily eliminated. But Sophia, those afternoons mean so much to both of us. Oliver always has such a good time, and I know, Mom, and we appreciate everything you do. But we really need to focus on consistency right now. You understand, it wasn't a question. It was a statement designed to end the conversation and make me feel selfish for wanting more time with my grandson. The second cut came when I offered to host my annual holiday cookie baking day. For 15 years, Sophia and I had spent a Saturday in December transforming my kitchen into a Christmas wonderland, making dozens of cookies to give as gifts to friends, neighbors, and co-workers. It was messy, chaotic, and absolutely magical. "That sounds lovely, Mom," Sophia said when I called to schedule it. "But I've actually signed up for a cookie decorating class at the country club. Several of the other mothers from our neighborhood are going, And I thought it would be good for Oliver to socialize with the other children. A cookie decorating class. At a country club. Instead of the tradition we'd shared since she was 13 years old. Well, maybe we could do both, I suggested, hating how desperate I sounded. The class sounds wonderful, but we could still have our day too. Oh, Mom, that would be so much work. And honestly, Oliver gets overstimulated really easily. These days, the pediatrician says too many sugar-heavy activities can affect his behavior. Our cookie baking day, where she'd learn to measure ingredients and follow recipes and create edible art with her own hands, was now a sugar-heavy activity that might damage her son's development. The third cut was the deepest. 2 weeks before Christmas, I'd asked if I could at least see Oliver on Christmas Eve, even if they were doing Christmas Day as their own family. It wasn't much to ask. Just a few hours to read him a story, maybe give him one small gift, maintain some connection to the holidays we'd always shared. I don't think that's going to work, Mom, Sophia said, her voice taking on that careful, overly patient tone people use when explaining things to someone they consider unreasonable. We're having Christmas Eve dinner with Marcus's family at Vivian's house. It's going to be quite formal, and honestly, Oliver gets cranky when his routine changes too much. What about Christmas afternoon, after you've had your family time? We're committed to the full day at Vivian's. She's planned this elaborate celebration, and it wouldn't be appropriate to leave early. Appropriate. Everything was about what was appropriate now, and apparently, spending time with me no longer qualified. But it was the fourth cut that revealed the true scope of what was happening. I'd been struggling with whether to ask about New Year's Eve. Sophia and I had always spent it together, staying up late watching movies and making resolutions we'd laugh about later. It wasn't a major holiday, just a quiet tradition between mother and daughter. Before I could even ask, Sophia brought it up herself. Oh, and Mom, I should mention that we're going to start hosting our own New Year's celebration this year. Just a small gathering of couples from the neighborhood. You know how these things are. It's really more of it's designed for parents in similar life stages. Similar life stages, not grandparents, not people who might not fit seamlessly into their curated social circle. That's when I realized this wasn't about Christmas schedules or Oliver's routine or establishing independence. This was about erasure. Systematic, deliberate erasure of my role in their lives. I'd become an inconvenient reminder of a past Sophia wanted to leave behind. My modest apartment, my working-class job, my simple pleasures, they were all obstacles to the sophisticated image she was building in her new community. Every time I appeared at their events, every tradition we shared, every story about our earlier life together, I threatened the narrative she was constructing about who she'd always been. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My daughter, the little girl I'd raised to value authenticity and kindness above all else, was ashamed of me. Not just annoyed or overwhelmed or seeking independence, ashamed. So ashamed that she was willing to sacrifice nearly 3 decades of closeness to avoid the embarrassment of my presence. I started noticing other signs I'd previously missed or excused. The way Sophia never mentioned me when posting about family events on social media. The way she'd deflect when Marcus's friends asked about her background, giving vague answers about her childhood without mentioning the woman who'd shaped it. The way she'd grown uncomfortable whenever I wore my work scrubs to pick up Oliver, as if my profession was something to be hidden rather than respected. Most painfully, I began to understand that Oliver himself was being gradually trained to see me as less important than his other grandparents. When I visited, he was polite but distant, clearly having been coached about quiet inside voices and sitting nicely, rules that somehow never applied when he was with Vivian, who let him run wild through her mansion while laughing indulgently at his spirited nature. The contrast was stark and deliberate. At Vivian's house, Oliver was encouraged to explore, to be loud, to claim space. At my apartment, he was expected to be controlled, contained, careful not to disturb the neighbors or break anything valuable. The message was clear. Grandma Vivian's house was a place for fun and freedom, while Grandma Catherine's house was a place for restrictions and rules. But it was Marcus who delivered the most devastating blow, though I don't think he meant it to be overheard. I'd arrived early for one of my increasingly rare babysitting sessions and had let myself in with the key Sophia had given me months earlier. They were in the kitchen, voices lowered but not quite enough. "I just think we need to be more intentional about Oliver's influences," Marcus was saying. The specialist we consulted about childhood development was very clear about the importance of consistent messaging about values and expectations. "I know," Sophia replied, her voice tired. "It's just difficult. She means well. I'm sure she does. But good intentions don't always translate to positive outcomes. Look at how he behaved after that afternoon with her last month. Cranky, overstimulated, upset about leaving. It took us 3 days to get him back to normal." Normal. As if time with me was an aberration that required recovery. "Maybe we could just reduce the frequency," Sophia suggested. "Make it more of an occasional treat rather than a regular thing." An occasional treat. Like I was a carnival ride or a piece of candy. Something to be rationed and controlled rather than a grandmother who loved him unconditionally. "That might be wise," Marcus agreed. "And honestly, Soph, you've built such an amazing life for yourself. You deserve to enjoy it without feeling guilty about leaving certain aspects of your past behind." Certain aspects of your past. That's what I'd become. Not a person, not a mother, not a crucial part of Sophia's story. Just an aspect of her past that was holding her back from fully embracing her present. I'd stood in their foyer, listening to my own daughter discuss strategies for minimizing my presence in her child's life, and felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered, but something deeper. My sense of my own worth, my understanding of my place in the world, my belief that love and sacrifice and devotion meant something permanent and unshakable. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by photo albums documenting 28 years of motherhood. Birthday parties in our tiny kitchen. School plays where I was the only parent cheering. Graduation day when Sophia had thanked me in her speech for showing me that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Had I imagined all of that? Had I constructed a fantasy relationship that existed only in my own mind? Or had Marcus and his family's influence been so powerful that it had literally rewritten Sophia's understanding of her own history? Either way, one thing was becoming crystal clear. The life I'd known was ending. The relationship I'd treasured above all others was being systematically dismantled, and unless something changed dramatically, I was going to lose not just Christmas, but everything. My daughter, my grandson, my sense of purpose and identity. But what Marcus and Sophia and Vivian didn't know was that some people, when pushed to their absolute breaking point, don't just break. Sometimes they break free. The morning after overhearing Marcus and Sophia's conversation about minimizing my influence in Oliver's life, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades: rage. Not the soft, self-doubting sadness that had characterized my response to their recent rejection, but clean, focused, empowering rage. I'd spent 28 years accepting less than I deserved because I believed that love meant never demanding recognition for your sacrifices. I'd taught myself that being a good mother meant being grateful for whatever scraps of attention and affection my daughter chose to give me. I'd convinced myself that asking for respect was selfish, that expecting gratitude was unreasonable. But sitting in my kitchen that morning, drinking coffee from the mug Sophia had made me in her high school pottery class, one of the few gifts she'd created with her own hands that I still treasured, I realized I'd been wrong about everything. Love isn't supposed to require you to make yourself smaller and smaller until you disappear entirely. Devotion isn't supposed to be rewarded with shame and exclusion. Sacrifice isn't supposed to be met with embarrassment and careful management. I'd raised Sophia to believe she deserved respect, kindness, and genuine appreciation. I'd taught her to value herself, to recognize her worth, to demand better when people treated her poorly. But somehow I'd forgotten to apply those same standards to my own life. The phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Sophia, making her weekly obligatory call. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" Her voice was bright and artificial, the tone she'd probably use with a distant acquaintance she felt obligated to check on periodically. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, though everything about the word sweetheart felt like a lie now. "How's Oliver?" "Oh, he's wonderful. Very busy, you know how toddlers are. Marcus and I have been talking about enrolling him in a music program at the community center. Mrs. Henderson from down the street recommended it." Mrs. Henderson from down the street. A virtual stranger got to recommend activities for my grandson, while I wasn't even allowed to take him to see Christmas lights. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Will I get to hear about his music lessons?" A pause. "Well, of course, Mom. I mean, when it comes up naturally in conversation." When it comes up naturally in conversation. Not because she wanted to share his milestones with me, but if it happened to fit into whatever limited communication she was willing to maintain. "Sophia," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "I'd like to talk to you about Christmas." "Mom, we've already discussed this. Marcus and I really feel it's important to—" "I know what you feel is important," I interrupted, "but I'd like you to hear what I feel is important too." Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear her mental calculation, how to handle this disruption to her carefully managed script. "Of course, Mom, I'm listening." But she wasn't listening. I could hear it in her voice, that polite distance that meant she was already formulating her response while I spoke. "Christmas has been the foundation of our relationship for 28 years, I said. "It's not just a holiday for us. It's our history, our tradition, our way of celebrating everything we've built together. When you tell me I'm not welcome anymore, you're not just changing plans for one day. You're telling me that none of that matters to you anymore." "That's not true, Mom. Of course our history matters. We're just trying to create some new traditions that work for our current situation." Current situation. As if my existence was a temporary inconvenience they were hoping would resolve itself. "Sophia, do you remember what you told me on your wedding day?" "Mom, please don't—" "You said that no matter how much your life changed, you would never forget who raised you or what we meant to each other. You promised that you would always make room for me in whatever family you built." Silence. Long, uncomfortable. Silence. "Circumstances change, Mom. When you have children, you have to prioritize their needs above everything else. I'm sure you understand that. You understand that." When you have children. As if I hadn't spent nearly 3 decades prioritizing her needs above my own comfort, my own dreams, my own social life, my own chances at love and partnership. "I do understand that," I said. "Which is why I gave up dating for 15 years to focus entirely on raising you. Why I worked extra shifts to pay for your college instead of saving for my retirement. Why did I spend my inheritance from your grandmother on your wedding instead of securing my own future?" "Your inheritance?" Sophia's voice sharpened with surprise. "What inheritance?" And there it was. The moment I realized that Marcus and his family weren't the only ones who had assumptions about my financial situation. Sophia herself had never asked where the money for her education had come from, how I'd managed to pay for her wedding contribution, what resources I might have beyond my modest paycheck. She'd simply assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be. A working-class single mother living paycheck to paycheck, grateful for whatever role her new family chose to give me. "My mother left me some money when she died," I said quietly. "Not a fortune, but enough to make a difference. I used most of It to give you opportunities I never had. I didn't know. You never asked. In 28 years, Sophia, you've never once asked about my financial situation, my retirement plans, my resources, or my future. You've just assumed that taking care of you was my only priority and my only capability. The silence that followed was different. Uncomfortable in a way that suggested she was beginning to recognize some uncomfortable truths. But that changes now, I continued, because I've realized something important. I taught you to value yourself and demand respect from the people in your life. I taught you never to accept being treated as if you don't matter. And it's time I started following my own advice. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that if you don't want me at Christmas, that's your choice. But it's also my choice how to respond to being excluded from my own family. You're being dramatic. It's just one Christmas. No, Sophia. It's not just one Christmas. It's the way you've been systematically removing me from Oliver's life. It's the way you've been embarrassed by my presence at your social events. It's the way you and Marcus discuss me like I'm a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. She was realizing I'd overheard their conversation. Mom, you don't understand. Marcus has very specific ideas about. I understand perfectly. Marcus has convinced you that I'm an embarrassment. That my job, my lifestyle, my traditions are holding you back from the sophisticated life you want to build. And you've chosen his opinion over 28 years of love and sacrifice. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you defended me, Sophia? When was the last time you told Marcus or his mother that I deserve respect? When was the last time you chose my feelings over their convenience? Silence again. Because we both knew the answer. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. I will always love you. You will always be my daughter. But I will not continue to accept being treated as if I'm disposable. What does that mean? It means that actions have consequences. When you choose to exclude people who have given everything for you, you might discover that those people have options you never considered. Mom, you're scaring me. What are you planning to do? For the first time in months, I smiled. A real smile, not the careful, placating expression I'd worn during all our recent interactions. I'm planning to stop making myself small to accommodate other people's discomfort with who I am. I'm planning to stop being grateful for scraps when I deserve a place at the table. I'm planning to remember that I have value beyond what I can provide for other people. I don't understand what that means. You will, I said. I love you, Sophia, but I won't be calling you next week. When you're ready to apologize for the way you've treated me, and when you're ready to discuss how we rebuild our relationship on terms that actually respect both of us, you know where to find me. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or sadness. For the first time in months, I felt powerful. I felt clear. I felt like myself again, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. That afternoon, I called my financial advisor, Robert Chen, who had managed my modest investments for the past 15 years. Robert had been encouraging me for years to be more aggressive with my portfolio, pointing out that my careful, conservative approach meant I was potentially missing out on significant growth opportunities. Catherine, he said when I explained what I wanted to discuss, are you sure about this? You've always been very cautious about major financial moves. I've been cautious about everything, Robert. And where has that gotten me? When I explained my situation, not the family drama, just that I was considering some lifestyle changes that might require more liquid assets, he was surprisingly supportive. Actually, this might be perfect timing, he said. There are some interesting real estate opportunities in the market right now. Properties that have been sitting for months because they're too expensive for most buyers, but might be excellent. Investments for someone in your position. Real estate opportunities. I felt something click into place. Robert, I said, What can you tell me about estate properties? The kind of places people rent for weddings and special events. There was a pause. Are you thinking about getting into the hospitality business? I'm thinking about exploring my options. Well, the market is actually quite favorable right now for buyers. A lot of these luxury properties are owned by families who are struggling with maintenance costs and property taxes. Many of them would be open to offers significantly below the asking price. How significantly? Depending on the property and the family's financial situation, 30 to 40% below market value wouldn't be unreasonable. 30 to 40%. I did some quick mental math, factoring in the inheritance I'd never touched, the money I'd saved by living modestly for decades, the retirement fund I'd been building since Sophia graduated college. Robert, I said, I'd like you to research a specific property for me, Ravenswood Estate. I want to know everything: who owns it, what their financial situation is, and whether they might be interested in selling. Ravenswood? The wedding venue? Out on Highland Road? That's the one. May I ask why you're interested in that particular property? I smiled, feeling something that might have been joy for the first time in weeks. Let's just say I have some personal reasons for wanting to ensure it's properly managed. Robert worked faster than I'd expected. Within 48 hours, he'd compiled a comprehensive report on Ravenswood Estate that read like a roadmap to everything I needed to know. The property was owned by the Ashford family, old money that had been hemorrhaging for the past decade due to poor investments and expensive lifestyle choices that their dwindling trust fund could no longer support. The estate itself was a masterpiece. 47 acres of rolling hills, formal gardens, and woodland trails surrounding a 19th-century manor house that had been featured in architectural magazines. The ballroom where Sophia had danced at her wedding could accommodate 300 guests. The library where she'd taken her bridal portraits housed first-edition books worth more than most people's houses. The gardens where she'd posed for photos were maintained by a full-time staff of 6 gardeners. But beauty doesn't pay property taxes, and property taxes on Ravenswood were crushing the current owners. They're 3 months behind on payments, Robert explained during our meeting at his downtown office. The state has already filed a tax lien, and if they can't bring the account current within 6 months, they'll face foreclosure proceedings. How much do they owe? I asked. Total, including penalties and interest, just over $200,000. I felt my heart rate quicken. $200,000 was significant, but it wasn't impossible. Not with the resources I'd been carefully accumulating for decades. But here's the interesting part, Robert continued, pulling out another folder. They've been trying to sell for 18 months. The asking price started at $4.2 million, but they've dropped it twice. Current listing is $3.1 million, and according to my contact at the real estate agency, they'd probably accept $2.5 million. For a property that had generated probably double that amount in revenue over the past 5 years from weddings alone. Why hasn't it sold? Robert shrugged. Too expensive for most private buyers, too specialized for commercial investors. It's in that awkward middle ground where it's too much house for a family but too much work for someone who just wants a business property. Except for someone who understands exactly what they're getting into, I said. Exactly. Someone who knows the business model, understands the market, and has the capital to bring it up to full potential. I stared at the photographs Robert had included in his report. Wide shots of the ballroom, close-ups of the architectural details, aerial views of the entire property. In one photo, I could see the exact spot where Sophia and Marcus had exchanged vows, the rose arbor where they'd posed for their first photos as husband and wife, the terrace where I'd stood watching my daughter begin what I'd thought would be the happiest chapter of her life. Robert, I said, what would I need to make this happen? He pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. The property taxes to bring it current, the purchase price, assuming we can negotiate them down to 2.5, closing costs, inspections, immediate repairs to bring it up to proper standards. You're looking at roughly $3 million. All in. $3 million. It was more money than I'd ever spent on anything. More than most people would see in a lifetime. But it was also less than I had available, thanks to decades of careful saving and an inheritance I'd invested wisely instead of spending frivolously. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Money isn't just about having pretty things, Catherine. It's about having choices when other people think you don't have any. Can you make contact with their real estate agent? I asked. I can have an offer on their desk by tomorrow morning, Robert replied. But Catherine, are you sure about this? This is a massive undertaking. Managing a property like this, running events, dealing with vendors and clients, it's essentially a full-time business. I know, I said, but I'm not planning to manage it myself long-term. I'm planning to own it. Robert's expression shifted as he began to understand the implications. This is about your daughter's wedding venue, isn't it? Among other things, I said. But mostly it's about remembering that I have value beyond what I can provide for other people. That evening, I received a call from Linda Ashford herself. Apparently, Robert's contact had moved quickly, and my offer, $2.3 million cash, with a 60-day closing period and willingness to cover all back taxes immediately, had gotten their attention. Mrs. Whitmore, Linda said, her voice carrying the particular strain of someone trying to maintain dignity while facing financial disaster. I understand you're interested in purchasing Ravenswood. I am. May I ask what your plans are for the property? We've had several investors express interest, but most of them want to subdivide the land or convert the manor into condominiums. This estate has been in my family for 4 generations. If we must sell, we'd prefer it go to someone who appreciates its historical significance. Historical significance. I almost laughed. What I appreciated was its personal significance. Specifically, its significance to a daughter who had decided I was no longer worthy of a place in her life. I plan to continue operating it as an event venue, I said, with some improvements and updates to enhance its appeal for weddings and corporate functions. That's wonderful to hear. And you have experience in hospitality management? I have experience in taking care of people, I said. And I have the financial resources to ensure the property receives the attention it deserves. 3 weeks later, I sat in a lawyer's office signing papers that transferred ownership of Ravenswood Estate to Catherine Whitmore. Linda Ashford had tears in her eyes as she handed over the keys. Heavy, old-fashioned brass keys that somehow felt weighty with possibility. Take good care of her, Linda said. This place has seen so much joy over the years, so many beginnings. Intend to ensure it sees many more, I replied, and I meant it. But I also intended to ensure that some people learned there were consequences for treating others as disposable. The first call I made from my new office, a sunny room on the 2nd floor of the manor with windows overlooking the rose gardens, was to Margaret Sullivan, the event coordinator who had managed Sophia's wedding. Mrs. Whitmore, Margaret said, her voice bright with recognition. How lovely to hear from you. How are Sophia and Marcus doing? I saw some photos from their first anniversary celebration. It looked beautiful. Their first anniversary celebration. An event I hadn't been invited to, held at the country club, completely separate from anything that might have included me. They're doing well, I said, but I'm actually calling about a business matter. I've recently purchased Ravenswood Estate. A pause. You've purchased it? Yes, I'm the new owner, and I'm interested in discussing some management changes that might improve our service offerings. Of course! I'd be delighted to meet with you. When would be convenient? How about tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock? After I hung up, I walked through the manor slowly, trailing my fingers along surfaces that had witnessed my daughter's happiest day. The banister where she'd posed for photos, the doorway where she'd gathered her skirts before walking down the aisle, the mirror where she'd checked her lipstick one last time before becoming Mrs. Marcus Blackwood. In 8 months, this place had gone from being the setting of my daughter's fairy tale wedding to being my property, my investment, my power. But the most satisfying part wasn't the ownership itself. It was the knowledge that Sophia and Marcus had no idea. They were still operating under the assumption that I was a powerless, financially limited woman who could be managed and minimized at their convenience. They had no idea that the venue, where they'd celebrated their new beginning, was now controlled by the woman they'd decided to exclude from their future. My phone buzzed with a text message. Sophia. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation. Maybe we could talk again this weekend? I stared at the message for a long time, sitting in the window seat of what was now my office, looking out over acres of property that I owned outright. 3 weeks ago, I would have responded immediately, grateful for any sign that she might be reconsidering her position. I would have made myself available whatever time worked for her, accepting whatever scraps of attention she was willing to offer. But 3 weeks ago, I didn't own Ravenswood Estate. 3 weeks ago, I still believed that love meant accepting whatever treatment people chose to give you. I turned off my phone without responding. Some conversations were worth waiting for the right moment. And some revelations were worth the perfect timing. Besides, I had a business to run now. There were events to book, improvements to plan, and a future to build that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or inclusion. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Powerful, capable, and in control of my own destiny. And if that destiny happened to intersect with some people's assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of, well, that would just make the conversation more interesting when it finally happened. The call came on a snowy Thursday morning in mid-December, exactly 6 weeks after I'd purchased Ravenswood Estate. I was in my office reviewing renovation plans with the contractor when my assistant, Janet, knocked on the door with an expression that was half amused, half concerned. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "There's a Mrs. Blackwood on the phone. She says it's urgent and concerns a booking for next summer." Vivian. Of course it would be Vivian who discovered the change in ownership first. "Transfer the call to my office," I said, gesturing for the contractor to continue reviewing the plans while I took what I knew would be an interesting conversation. "Catherine," Vivian's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to talk immediately." "Good morning, Vivian," I said pleasantly. "How can I help you?" "Don't play games with me. I know you bought Ravenswood. Did you? And how did you find that out?" "Marcus and Sophia have been trying to book the estate for their second anniversary party next summer. When they called to make the reservation, they were told the new owner would need to approve all bookings personally. They mentioned it was for the Blackwood family, and Margaret Sullivan told them she'd need to check with Mrs. Catherine Whitmore." I smiled, imagining the moment when Margaret had innocently revealed my identity to my son-in-law. "I see. And this is a problem because it's insane!" Vivian's composure cracked completely. "You're a nurse from Millbrook Heights. You don't have the kind of money it takes to buy a property like that." "Don't I?" I kept my voice calm, almost conversational. "What kind of money do you think it takes, Vivian?" "Several $1,000,000, which you obviously don't have, so whatever game you're playing, whatever point you're trying to make, it needs to stop. The only game being played here is the one you and your family have been playing with my relationship with my daughter. And you're right about one thing. It does need to stop." There was a long pause. When Vivian spoke again, her voice had shifted to the tone she probably used with servants who had gotten above their station. "Catherine, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. This is clearly a reaction to the holidays being adjusted this year. But purchasing property you can't afford isn't the solution to family disagreements." "Who says I can't afford it? Be realistic. You work as a physical therapist. You live in a modest apartment. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. People in your financial situation don't buy multi-million-dollar estates." "People in my financial situation," I repeated slowly. "Tell me, Vivian, what exactly do you think you know about my financial situation?" "I know what I can see. I know you struggled as a single mother. I know you worked multiple jobs to support Sophia. I know you live simply. I've helped them understand the dynamics at play. When someone has lived with financial limitations their entire life, they can sometimes develop unrealistic expectations about what their children owe them. Unrealistic expectations. Like, expecting to spend Christmas with my grandson. I see. And you've convinced them that my financial limitations mean I should be grateful for whatever access to their lives they choose to give me? I've helped them establish healthy boundaries. Sophia needed to understand that she can't let guilt about your sacrifices prevent her from building the life she deserves. The life she deserves. Without me in it. Vivian, I said, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Have you been actively working to convince Sophia to exclude me from family events? Another pause. I've provided guidance about the importance of nuclear family independence. That's not what I asked. Catherine, you're obviously upset, but answer the question. Have you been telling Sophia that I'm a burden? That my presence at social events is embarrassing? That my traditions are outdated and inappropriate for the lifestyle you want them to have? Silence. Long, telling silence. Have you been coaching Marcus on how to minimize my influence in Oliver's life? I think this conversation has gone far enough. No, Vivian. This conversation is just getting started. You see, I've spent the last 2 months learning some very interesting things about family dynamics, about manipulation, about the difference between guidance and sabotage. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You've systematically poisoned my daughter against me because you were threatened by our relationship. You couldn't stand that Sophia had 28 years of love and history with someone you considered beneath your social standards. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then explain why you told your friend Laura that Sophia had done remarkably well for herself considering her background. Explain why you referred to me as earnest but limited at the charity luncheon last month. Explain why you've been telling people that Marcus rescued Sophia from a life of financial struggle. Vivian's intake of breath was sharp and audible. She wasn't expecting me to have heard any of that. How did I know? Because people talk, Vivian. Because when you spend your time gossiping about someone, word eventually gets back to them. And because I've learned to pay attention to patterns instead of making excuses for people's behavior. Even if those things were said, they weren't intended to hurt anyone. Weren't they? Then what were they intended to do? No answer. I'll tell you what they intended to do, I continued. They were intended to establish a narrative where Sophia's happiness depended on distancing herself from her past, where gratitude toward me was transformed into guilt and embarrassment, where my presence became an obstacle to her social acceptance rather than a foundation for her confidence. You're being paranoid. Am I? Then explain why Oliver has never been allowed to spend a night at my apartment, while he regularly stays weekends at your house. Explain why Sophia stopped mentioning me in social media posts about family events. Explain why she's suddenly developed sleep specialists and developmental experts who all seem to recommend reducing my contact with my own grandson. Those are legitimate concerns about child rearing. Those are manufactured concerns designed to justify excluding me. And you know it. The line went quiet again. When Vivian spoke, her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Even if everything you're saying were true, which I'm not admitting, it doesn't change the fundamental issue here. Sophia and Marcus are building a life that requires certain social standards. You may not like it, but that's reality. Social standards that don't include me. Social standards that don't include people who don't fit the image they're trying to create. There it was. Finally, the truth. The image they're trying to create, I repeated. And what image is that exactly? Sophisticated, polished, connected, the kind of people who belong in certain circles, the kind of people who abandon their mothers when they become inconvenient, the kind of people who understand that family obligations can't be allowed to limit personal growth. family obligations. That's what I'd become in her mind. Not a person who deserved love and respect, but an obligation that was holding her son and daughter-in-law back from their full potential. "Well, Vivienne," I said, "I have some news for you about family obligations and personal growth." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that your son and daughter-in-law want to book Ravenswood for their anniversary party next summer. And as the owner of that property, I'll be making all decisions about which events we choose to host." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. In fact, I've been reviewing our booking policies, and I've decided that we're going to be much more selective about our clientele going forward. We're only going to work with families who demonstrate genuine respect for all their members, who value loyalty and kindness over social climbing, and who understand that love isn't conditional on someone's ability to enhance their image. You can't use your ownership of that property as revenge against your own daughter." "I'm not using it as revenge. I'm using it as a lesson about consequences, about respect, about what happens when you mistake someone's kindness for weakness and their love for desperation. This is insane. I'm calling Marcus right now. You do that. And tell him that when he and Sophia are ready to have an honest conversation about the way they've treated me, and when they're ready to apologize for allowing you to manipulate them into choosing social status over family loyalty, I'll be happy to discuss their anniversary party. And if they're not, then they'll need to find a different venue. I'm sure you can recommend somewhere that caters to people who think family is disposable when it becomes inconvenient." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly, from adrenaline and satisfaction. 3 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. "Catherine," he said, his voice strained with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk." "Hello, Marcus. Yes, I think we do." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm running my business according to my values. Is there something specific you'd like to discuss about your anniversary party booking?" "You know, exactly what this is about. Vivienne told me about your conversation." "Good. Then you understand the situation." "The situation is that you've lost your mind. Buying property to manipulate your own family." "Buying property to secure my future independence," I corrected. "The manipulation has been coming from your mother, not from me." "That's not fair. My mother has been trying to help us establish appropriate boundaries. Appropriate boundaries that exclude me from Christmas, from family traditions, and from my grandson's life? Catherine, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." "Am I?" "Then tell me, Marcus, when was the last time you defended me when your mother made disparaging comments about my background? When was the last time you encouraged Sophia to maintain our traditions instead of replacing them with your family's preferences? When was the last time you treated me like a valued member of your family instead of an inconvenience to be managed?" Silence. "That's what I thought," I said. "Now, about that anniversary party. Would you like to discuss the terms under which I might consider hosting it?" Marcus's silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Less angry, more confused, and somehow smaller. "Catherine, I don't understand what's happening here. How did you even afford to buy Ravenswood?" "The same way you afforded your house, Marcus, with money I'd saved and invested over the years." "But you're a nurse. You live in that little apartment. You drive an old car. I'm a nurse by choice, not by limitation. I live simply by choice, not by necessity. And I drive a reliable car because flashy displays of wealth have never been important to me." Another pause. "Are you telling me you've been, secretly wealthy this whole time?" "I'm telling you that there's a difference between someone who can't afford better and someone who doesn't see the need to prove their worth through expensive possessions." I could practically hear him trying to recalibrate everything he thought he knew about me. "But if you had money, why didn't you ever say anything? Why let us think?" "Why let you think what, Marcus?" "That you were struggling. That you needed our help. That That Sophia was supporting me instead of the other way around?" I finished. Because I've never needed your help, Marcus. What I needed was respect. What I needed was to maintain my relationship with my daughter and grandson. What I needed was for my family to value me for who I am, rather than manage me like an embarrassing obligation. But why hide it? Why not tell us about your financial situation? Because, I said, feeling exhaustion creep into my voice. I wanted to be loved for myself, not for what I could provide. I wanted Sophia to choose me because I'm her mother, not because I could match your family's contributions to her lifestyle. The line went quiet again, and this time I could hear something that sounded like Marcus might be crying. "Oh, God," he whispered. "What have we done?" "You've shown me exactly what you think I'm worth," I said. "The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" "Now, Catherine, we need to fix this. Sophia's been miserable since your fight. She won't admit it, but she's been crying almost every night. She keeps saying she made a huge mistake, but she doesn't know how to take it back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. She's been crying every night. She looks at pictures of Christmases with you and just falls apart. Oliver keeps asking for Gamma Catherine, and she can't explain why you're not coming around anymore. Oliver had been asking for me. My chest tightened with longing and renewed hurt. Then why hasn't she called? I asked. Because my mother convinced her that you were probably relieved to be free of the burden of maintaining relationships with us. She said single women your age often use family conflicts as an opportunity to focus on their own lives without feeling guilty. Vivian's poison had gone even deeper than I'd realized. She'd convinced Sophia that I might actually prefer being excluded. "Marcus," I said carefully, "do you believe that? Do you think I was looking for an excuse to distance myself from Sophia and Oliver?" "No," he said immediately. "God, no. Anyone who spent 5 minutes watching you with Oliver could see how much you adore him. And Sophia, you dedicated your entire life to her. Then why did you go along with it? Why did you support excluding me from Christmas?" A long, shaky breath. "Because I'm weak," he said finally. "Because my mother has very strong opinions, and it's always been easier to go along with them than to fight her. Because I convinced myself that she knew better than I did about family dynamics. And because..." He trailed off. "Because what?" Because part of me was relieved not to have to navigate between my family's expectations and your very different approach to things. At least he was being honest. My approach to what things? Specifically? Everything. Christmas traditions, gift-giving, social events. My family does everything at a certain level, with certain expectations, and your way of celebrating was so different. I thought maybe it would be easier if we could just establish one consistent approach. Easier for who? For everyone. But I was wrong. I can see that now. Oliver lights up around you in a way he doesn't with anyone else. And Sophia, she's not herself without you in her life. And you? How do you feel about me being in your lives? Another pause. Honestly, I've learned more about kindness and genuine love watching you with Oliver than I learned from my entire childhood. When you teach him to paint with his fingers or sing him those lullabies or make him feel like every little thing he does is magical. That's what real love looks like, not the performance my family puts on. I was surprised by the emotion in his voice and by what sounded like genuine insight. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about Christmas. This is about years of feeling like you and Sophia were embarrassed by me. Like my traditions weren't sophisticated enough, my home wasn't nice enough, my gifts weren't expensive enough. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," I said. "If you want to fix this, really fix this, you need to understand that respect isn't conditional. You can't treat me like family when it's convenient and like an embarrassment when it's not. What do you need from us? I need Sophia to call me herself. I need her to acknowledge what happened and take responsibility for it. I need both of you to set boundaries with Vivian about her interference in our relationship. And I need to know that my place in your family is secure, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it. Done. All of it. And Catherine? Yes? I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. I love Sophia, and she loves you more than anything in the world. Losing you has been destroying her. Then why hasn't she fought for me? Because she's proud and hurt and convinced that you're better off without us. My heart ached thinking about Sophia crying herself to sleep, believing I might prefer to be alone rather than fight for our relationship. Marcus, I want you to do something for me. Anything. I want you to go home and tell Sophia that I love her. Tell her that every day since our fight has been devastating for me. Tell her that I miss her and Oliver so much it feels like a physical pain. And tell her that if she wants to fix this, she needs to call me. Not next week, not when she's ready. Today. I will. I promise. And Marcus, about your anniversary party. Catherine, please, if there's any way you could consider hosting it, it would mean everything to us. To Sophia especially. That venue. It represents the beginning of our marriage, the best day of her life. If we can't have it there, the party can happen, I said, but not the way you originally planned it. What do you mean? I mean that if you want to celebrate your anniversary at Ravenswood, it's going to be a real family celebration. Not just your social circle. Not just the people who meet Vivian's approval standards. Family, including me. Of course. Whatever you want. I want to help plan it. I want to be involved in the decisions about flowers and food and music. I want Oliver to know that his Gamma Catherine helped create something beautiful for his parents. And I want you to understand that this is who I am. Someone who creates magic through love and attention, not through money and status. Catherine, that sounds perfect. Better than perfect. Good. Now go talk to your wife. And Marcus? Yes? Thank you for the apology. It means more than you know. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the snow-covered gardens and feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope that maybe all of this pain could actually lead to something better. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Sophia. Mom? Her voice was thick with tears. Marcus told me about the conversation, about everything. I am so sorry. Oh, sweetheart, I said, and my own tears started falling. I've missed you so much. I've been the worst daughter in the world. I don't know how you can ever forgive me. You're not the worst daughter in the world. You're a daughter who got confused about what was important. But we can fix this. Can we? Really? Because I don't know how to make up for what I've done to you. We start with honesty, I said. And then we start with Christmas. Christmas? Oliver still needs his Gamma Catherine to teach him about real magic. And his mother needs to remember that the most beautiful celebrations come from love, not from money. Yes, she whispered. Yes, please. Can we have Christmas like we used to? With the handmade ornaments and the cinnamon rolls and all of it? We can have Christmas however you want it, sweetheart, as long as we have it together. And for the first time in months, I believed that everything might actually be okay. Christmas Eve at my apartment felt like stepping back in time, but better. Sophia arrived at 10 in the morning with Oliver in tow and her arms full of grocery bags, containing all the ingredients for our traditional Christmas Eve baking marathon. I bought everything, she said, her voice slightly breathless with nervous excitement. The flour you like, the real vanilla extract, those fancy chocolate chips Oliver loves, and… She paused, pulling out a small wrapped package. I found Something at the antique store downtown. Inside was a rolling pin, vintage wood with painted flowers, exactly like the one my grandmother had used when I was little. The one I'd told Sophia stories about for years but had never been able to find a replacement for after it broke during her college years. "Sophia," I whispered, running my fingers over the smooth wood. "How did you even remember?" "I remember everything, Mom. Every story you ever told me, every tradition we ever shared. I lost sight of why they mattered." Oliver, who had been standing uncertainly by the door, suddenly broke free from his reserved politeness and launched himself at my legs with a squeal of "Gamma Catherine." The sound of his voice saying my name again made my heart feel like it might burst. "My sweet boy," I said, scooping him up and breathing in that particular toddler scent of baby, shampoo and pure sweetness. "I've missed you so much. Mama said we were going to make cookies and sing songs and do all the special Christmas things," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "We absolutely are," I told him. "Are you ready to learn some Christmas magic?" The next 6 hours were pure joy. We made sugar cookies cut into star shapes and decorated them with colored icing and sprinkles. We attempted gingerbread men that looked more like abstract art than people, which made Oliver laugh so hard he got hiccups. We baked 24 cinnamon rolls for Christmas morning, filling the apartment with the warm, yeasty smell that had marked every Christmas of Sophia's childhood. But more than the baking, we talked. Really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. "I was so scared," Sophia admitted while we waited for the cookies to cool. Oliver was napping on the couch, exhausted from his first real Christmas baking experience. When Marcus told me about Ravenswood, about you owning it, I thought maybe you'd bought it specifically to punish us. "Partly I did," I said honestly. "But mostly I bought it because I needed to remember that I have value beyond what I can provide. For other people. I made you feel worthless. It wasn't a question. You made me feel invisible." Sophia was quiet for a long time, absently arranging cookies on a cooling rack. Vivienne used to make these subtle comments about our traditions. Nothing directly critical, just observations, about how charming it was that we made our own decorations. How sweet it was that you still worked as a nurse instead of retiring. How quaint our little apartment celebrations were compared to what Oliver could experience with their family. And you started seeing our traditions through her eyes instead of your own. I started feeling embarrassed about things that had always made me proud. I started worrying that bringing Oliver here, letting him see how simply we lived, would somehow limit his opportunities or make him think less of us, or make Marcus's family think less of you. "Yes." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I chose their approval over your love. How could I have been so stupid?" "You weren't stupid, sweetheart. You were overwhelmed. New marriage, new family, new social circle, new baby. It's easy to lose yourself when you're trying to fit into someone else's world. But you never lost yourself. Even when Dad left, even when money was tight, even when everything was falling apart, you never stopped being exactly who you were." "I had you," I said simply. "You were my anchor, my reminder of what really mattered. And I abandoned you the moment I didn't need that anchor anymore." "You didn't abandon me. You got confused about what was important. There's a difference." We spent the afternoon making paper snowflakes like we used to do when she was little, sitting on the living room floor with scissors and old magazines while Christmas music played softly in the background. Oliver woke up from his nap and immediately wanted to help, creating lopsided but enthusiastic contributions that we praised as masterpieces. "Mama, can we hang mine on the special tree?" he asked, holding up a snowflake that was more holes than paper. "What special tree, baby?" Sophia asked. "Gamma Catherine's tree. The one with all the stories." I looked at Sophia, who looked confused. "He means the memory tree," I explained. "The one I started when you were little. Every ornament has a story about our life together." "You still have that tree?" "Of course I still have it. It's in the storage closet. I was going to put it up this year, but I shrugged. It didn't seem worth it just for me. Can we put it up now? Sophia asked, her voice almost pleading. Can we tell Oliver all the stories? So we spent the evening setting up the memory tree, each ornament triggering floods of shared recollections. The construction paper angel Sophia had made in first grade, the painted pine cone from our Christmas morning when she was 8, the photo ornament from her high school graduation, the tiny stocking I'd embroidered when she'd gone away to college. Tell Oliver about this one, Sophia said, holding up a clay handprint painted red and green with Sophia age 4, written in my careful script. Well, I said, settling Oliver on my lap. When your mama was very little, we made this together on a snowy day just like today. She put her little hand in the clay and pressed down, and then we painted it with Christmas colors. Every year when we hang it on the tree, I remember how small her hands used to be. Are we going to make one of mine? Oliver asked. We absolutely are, Sophia said. We'll make one every year so Gamma Catherine can remember how you're growing up. By the time Marcus arrived to pick them up, the apartment looked like Christmas had exploded inside it in the most wonderful way. Flour on the counters, construction paper scraps on the floor, cookies cooling on every available surface, and the scent of cinnamon and vanilla permeating everything. It smells like my childhood, he said, looking around with something like wonder. I'd forgotten that Christmas could smell like home instead of like, I don't know, expensive candles and catered food. This is what real Christmas magic looks like, Sophia told him, gesturing at the beautiful chaos around us. Not perfect, not elegant, but full of love and memory and things that matter. Can we have Christmas morning here? Oliver asked suddenly. Please? I want to wake up where all the cookie smells live. Sophia looked at me hopefully. Would that be okay? I know it's presumptuous to invite ourselves, but this apartment has never been the same without Christmas morning voices, I said. Nothing would make me happier. As they prepared to leave, Sophia hugged me tightly. Mom, I have something to tell you. What's that, sweetheart? Marcus and I talked to Vivian yesterday. We told her that her interference in our relationship with you was unacceptable and that it stops now. We also told her that if she can't treat you with respect, she won't be included in our family events. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. But Marcus was amazing. He told her that our family works best when it includes all the people who actually love us, not just the people who look good in photographs. Looking at my daughter's face, radiant with the specific joy that comes from rediscovering something precious you thought you'd lost forever, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful gifts are the ones that get broken and then carefully pieced back together. They were stronger where they'd been mended. 6 months later, I stood in the grand ballroom of Ravenswood Estate, watching the final preparations for Sophia and Marcus's second anniversary party. But this wasn't the elegant, exclusive gathering they'd originally planned. This was something entirely different, something that reflected who we'd all become through the process of breaking apart and coming back together. The guest list included everyone who mattered to us, not just the people who impressed others. My colleagues from the hospital were chatting with Marcus's business partners. Sophia's college friends were sharing stories with neighbors from their street. Oliver was running between tables, showing off his new trick of counting to 10 in Spanish that he'd learned from Maria, our housekeeper at Ravenswood. Mom. Sophia appeared at my elbow, radiant in a flowing blue dress that she'd chosen because Oliver said it made her look like a princess. I can't believe you pulled this all together. It's absolutely perfect. The party was perfect, but not in the way Vivian would have defined perfection. The centerpieces were combinations of professional flowers and wildflowers that Oliver and I had picked that morning. The menu included both catered delicacies and homemade dishes that carried family memories, including 36 of my famous cinnamon rolls that had become the evening's most popular dessert. It's perfect because it's real, I said, watching. Marcus laughed at something Dr. Peterson from the hospital was telling him. Because it celebrates what you and Marcus have actually built together, not what other people think you should have built. The transformation in all of us over the past months had been remarkable to witness. Marcus had started joining us for our weekly Sunday dinners, bringing stories from his work and genuine curiosity about mine. He'd begun asking Oliver about our afternoon adventures instead of worrying about disrupted schedules. Most surprising of all, he'd started standing up to his mother when she made subtle criticisms about our family choices. You should have seen his face when I told Vivian that Oliver was learning to bake, Sophia said with a grin. She started going on about the importance of structured learning experiences, and Marcus just said, "Mother, he's learning patience, following directions, and creating something beautiful with his hands. What could be more structured than that?" Vivian herself was here tonight, though notably less central to the proceedings than she would have preferred. She'd adapted to the new family dynamics with the grace of someone who recognized she had limited options. She was still herself, elegant, opinionated, and slightly condescending, but she'd learned to keep her observations about our choices to herself. "How's the estate business treating you?" Marcus asked, appearing with Oliver perched on his shoulders. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. The property had become more than just my statement of independence. It had become a genuine passion. We're booked solid through next spring, and I've hired 2 additional event coordinators to handle the demand. What I didn't mention was how much I'd enjoyed the challenge of running a business, of making decisions about renovations and improvements, of creating beautiful experiences for other families celebrating their most important moments. After decades of focusing entirely on other people's needs, discovering my own professional ambitions had been unexpectedly fulfilling. And the scholarship program. "We awarded our first 3 scholarships last month," I said, feeling that familiar, warm glow of pride. "Young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who want to study hospitality management or event planning. They'll work here part-time while attending school, learning the business from the ground up." It had been Sophia's idea to create opportunities. For others, the way her education had been an opportunity for her. The scholarship program had become one of my favorite aspects of owning Ravenswood. "Gamma, Catherine. Watch this," Oliver called from his father's shoulders, proceeding to demonstrate his latest accomplishment, touching his nose with his tongue. "Magnificent," I declared, applauding enthusiastically. "You're definitely the most talented nose-tongue toucher at this entire party. Are you going to teach me more painting tomorrow?" he asked. "Of course. We're going to paint the ducks we saw at the pond today." Our art sessions had become a weekly tradition that both Oliver and I treasured. He had his grandfather's artistic instincts and his mother's fearless creativity, approaching every blank canvas like it held infinite possibility. "You know what I love most about tonight?" Sophia said, slipping her arm through mine as we watched the diverse group of guests enjoying themselves in the beautiful space. "What's that?" "Everyone here actually knows us. Really knows us. 6 months ago, I was so worried about impressing people who didn't even care about our happiness. Tonight, we're surrounded by people who love us for who we really are." "And who do you really are?" I asked. "We're a family that chooses love over appearances every time. We're a family that values traditions and memories more than status and money. We're a family that includes everyone who matters, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it." She paused, watching Marcus show Oliver how to properly shake hands with the adults he was meeting. "Most of all, we're a family that learned that some bonds are worth fighting for, even when that means having difficult conversations and making big changes. Even when it means buying wedding venues to prove a point?" I teased. "Especially when it means buying wedding venues to prove a point," she laughed. "Though I still can't believe you actually did that. I can't believe it took me that long to do it." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself standing on the terrace where Sophia and Marcus had exchanged vows 18 months earlier. The space looked different now, more lived in, more welcoming, more genuine somehow. Thank you, Marcus said, joining me at the stone railing, for all of this, for giving us the chance to fix things, for showing us what really matters. Thank you for being brave enough to grow, I replied. It would have been easier to stay angry and apart. No, he said seriously. It wouldn't have been easier. It would have been devastating. Sophia wasn't herself without you, and Oliver needs his Gamma Catherine. We all do. I need you too, I said, meaning it completely. All of you. This family we've built together, messy and complicated as it is. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the cleanup was finished, I sat in my office at Ravenswood, looking through the photos on my phone from the evening. Pictures of Oliver covered in frosting from sneaking tastes of cake. Sophia and Marcus danced to music that wasn't perfectly coordinated, but was perfectly joyful. Groups of friends and family members who'd found common ground despite their different backgrounds. But my favorite photo was one that Sophia had taken without my knowing. Me and Vivienne, standing together watching Oliver attempt to blow bubbles, both of us smiling at his determined concentration. We weren't friends, might never be friends, but we'd found a way to coexist peacefully in the family we shared. Sometimes the most important victories weren't about winning or losing. Sometimes they were about everyone finding a way to be their authentic selves within the same space, creating something beautiful and sustainable and real. 2 years after buying Ravenswood Estate, I'm writing this story from my office on Christmas morning, waiting for Sophia, Marcus, and Oliver to arrive. For our traditional celebration, the snow is falling softly outside my windows, and the manor is decorated with a perfect blend of professional elegance and handmade charm, much like our family has become. This morning, I received a text from Sophia that made me smile. Oliver. Woke up at 5 a.m. asking if it was time to go to Gamma Catherine's castle yet. We'll be there early with extra coffee and cinnamon rolls from the batch we made last night. Warning. Oliver insists on wearing his Superman costume because heroes should look their best for Christmas. A 3-year-old in a Superman costume. Arriving at a multi-million-dollar estate for handmade cinnamon rolls and paper snowflake crafting. If that doesn't perfectly capture what our family has become, nothing does. People often ask me if I regret the dramatic way I handled Sophia's Christmas ultimatum. If I think buying an expensive property just to prove a point was excessive or manipulative. The answer is complicated, because the question misses the real story. I didn't buy Ravenswood to punish my daughter or to manipulate my family. I bought it because I needed to remember my own worth. For years, I'd defined myself entirely through my relationships with other people, first as David's wife, then as Sophia's mother, then as Oliver's grandmother. When those relationships became conditional on my willingness to make myself smaller and less visible, I forgot that I was a complete person with value beyond what I could provide for others. The property purchase wasn't revenge, it was a reclamation. Reclaiming my right to take up space in the world, reclaiming my right to set boundaries about how I would and wouldn't be treated, reclaiming my identity as someone who deserved respect and love for who I was, not gratitude and management for what I could give. But here's what I've learned in the 2 years since. The most powerful thing about that purchase wasn't the money, or the property, or even the shock value. It was the conversation it forced us to have. The truth required everyone to face what we'd all become willing to accept. Sophia had to confront the fact that she'd been choosing social acceptance over family loyalty. Marcus had to acknowledge that he'd been taking the easy path of avoiding conflict rather than standing up for what was right. Vivienne had to recognize that her manipulation had nearly destroyed something precious, and I had to admit that I'd been enabling all of it by accepting less than I deserved, because I was afraid of demanding more. The real transformation in our family didn't come from the grand gesture. It came from the daily choice, repeated over and over again, to choose authenticity over convenience, love over appearance, growth over comfort. Marcus learned to value substance over status, finding genuine joy in finger painting sessions with Oliver and discovering that homemade gifts often mean more than expensive ones. Sophia remembered that her strength came from the values I'd taught her, not from her ability to distance herself from them. Oliver is growing up knowing that love shows up in many forms, sometimes in elegant ballrooms, sometimes in tiny apartment kitchens, but always in the willingness of people to choose each other again and again. Even Vivian has evolved, though, slowly and often grudgingly. She's learned that influence built on manipulation is ultimately fragile, while influence built on genuine care and respect endures. She still hosts elaborate holiday parties, but she's stopped expecting us to choose her events over our own traditions. The lesson here isn't about money or property or dramatic gestures. It's about knowing your worth and demanding that the people in your life recognize it too. It's about understanding that love shouldn't require you to diminish yourself, that family bonds should add to your life rather than limit it, and that sometimes the people who claim to want what's best for you are really asking you to become who they need you to be rather than who you actually are. If you're reading this story and recognizing your own situation, if you've been making yourself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort, if you've been accepting less than you deserve because asking for more feels selfish, if you've been allowing others to define your worth based on their own limitations, then I want you to know something important. You have options you haven't considered yet. You have value beyond what you can provide for others. You have the right to set boundaries about how you will and won't be treated. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for the people in your life is to stop enabling their worst impulses by refusing to accept them. The Christmas mornings we share now are more beautiful than any we had before, not because they're more expensive or elaborate, but because they're built on genuine respect and authentic love. Oliver will grow up knowing that family means showing up for each other completely, not performing for each other's approval. That's worth more than any estate, any inheritance, any amount of money in the world. And that's the real magic of Christmas. Not the gifts or the decorations or the perfect photographs, but the decision to choose love over fear, authenticity over performance, and each other over everyone else's expectations. Every single time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.